Okay, so we are talking about trauma and parenting trauma and developmental disabilities. And this is part of what I was trying to get out to my audience during FASD Awareness Month. So I feel like your audience must be super trauma informed, right? That's like, that's your thing. Um, so I'll start off with what FASD is to put us in some context. So as we talk, we can kind of identify what we're speaking about. So FASD is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which is the most common form of developmental disabilities affecting 5% of the population. And it is often misdiagnosed as ADHD or autism. The symptoms are like impulsivity, distractibility, poor judgment, inability to understand cause and effect, like these kinds of things that look like a kid's being bad, right? And this is where our gray area that we're going to talk about in here is social skills are not usually on par with their peers. So there's the gap between their chronological age and their developmental age. And so we see this gap as like willful, not being a good kid kind of thing. And so this is something that we talk a lot about in the FASD community because we're talking about, we want to talk about brain-based parenting and parenting to the kid's brain that we have in front of us, right? But in the moment, it is very difficult to stop yourself and be like, this is the brain. I often find myself reacting much differently than I would tell someone to when I'm advising other families. So I listened to a little bit of your podcast and I was like, this is, and we talked, but as I was listening to the podcast, even I was like, this is her jam. This is exactly what she does. So could you talk a little bit about what you do and how you see this intersection?
Absolutely. So I am a trauma specializing therapist, and I'm moving towards exclusively working with multi-generational families. And then I do a lot of training and consulting around trauma.
Your name is
And
everywhere
so,
in our area.
yeah. And so I think the biggest thing that I would say I do is I help people understand how the experiences they've had in the past impact their central nervous system and how their brain functions and how they engage with the world in the present. A lot of people are thinking about like making changes. I want to be a strength-based parent, which means I have to change this, this, and this. I want to lose weight. I want to stop smoking. I mean, whatever. I want to make a change. And unfortunately, people have been, I think, socialized to believe that change is the first step. When actually, before we can make that change, we have to figure out what's the root of what we're doing or not doing. What need is it meeting? Once we can identify that, then we can replace that need, which requires skill building and practice and failing and starting over. And once we get that muscle pretty good, then we'll find that we can begin to start to let go or start those things that we want to change. And so I do that from a counseling perspective, but also from an organizational training perspective to help organizations do the same.
So you're saying that I can't just read a book on telling me to do the right things and do the right things. I kind of have to look at the deep root of whatever is in between what I want to be doing and what I'm doing now, heal that a little bit, retrain my brain, and move in that direction. Did I summarize that?
That's kind of what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying you can, but you'll be very frustrated. And more than likely, you would develop self-deprecating thoughts that turn into words, and you would go into a shame spiral and wonder what's wrong with you and why you can't change. So you could go that route.
Yeah.
It wouldn't necessarily lead to change. It would either lead to a hyper obsession with it, or a dismissal of it. Yeah. It's really anywhere in between. But yeah, no, it's just not that simple. Now, there's a lot of money to be made on making people believe it's that simple. And there's a lot of supremacy to be had in causing people to believe that it's that simple, because there's a lot of money in our insecurities. But if we talk about sustainable, effective change, then it is a process.
Well, and you brought up shame too, which I think if you're like trying to execute this plan and you can't quite get it, if you're a parent who is parenting a kid who has brain differences and you're like, I'm going to do the right thing, but you're in the moment and you get caught up and you don't do what you were picturing you were going to do, there's definitely shame involved from us. But I think also what we're working on realizing as parents is that there is shame from our kids too when they can't meet our expectations. And so I can better identify this because I had a therapist that talked a lot about shame, and she was talking about it for me, but when I could recognize it in myself, I could see it in others also. And so I can now step back from a parenting situation and be like, okay, so I think this kid is feeling a lot of shame over what just happened, and I need to give him space, and then we can talk about, like, it's okay that you made a mistake, it's not a big deal, and then get back to it. But I had childhood trauma, and I know that when I started parenting trauma, my response was not trauma informed. I was trauma informed. I knew it was trauma. I just was not trauma executing.
Yeah, trauma responsive
Yes, that
is
was
the
not that.
got it.
And then as I started to realize that there were brain-based disability or differences, I realized that what I was expecting was what I was raised expecting out of a child. And then that expectation wasn't being met. And so then there's all these feelings about, well, you should be able to do X, Y, and Z. And like, this is how responsible kids would respond. And I have to train you for the real world. And there's all these kinds of things that are coming out from my own past that have nothing to do with this child. So I feel like that was one thing about what you do that's super fascinating to me. So could you talk a little bit about what it looks like as a parent to identify how your trauma may be influencing your current parenting strategy?
Absolutely. So the model that I use, in life. So yes, in therapy, yes, in training, but in life is developmental and relational trauma therapy based on the work of Pia Melody in post-induction therapy. Got to give it her due. Essentially, what it is those little children that we were still live inside of us. And so they are 5 and 7. So mine, I got a 3 that I've specifically worked with. I have a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 17-year-old. And they each have individual needs, and they're each trying to accomplish something, which is to help me be safe. I think the overarching theme that I want to share with humanity is that as humans, we are either safe or in pursuit of safety. Those are the only 2 options we have. Now, we can make up all the kind of stories about people being jerks, and, I don't know your audience, so I'll save all the colorful languages that we use.
Yeah. I use that with them also.
But we can make up all these stories that we want to about why a person is doing what they're doing. But when it comes down to it, they're either safe or in pursuit of safety. And so are our littles, is what I call it, our inner children. And so when we encounter a situation that activates them because it doesn't feel safe, then the responses we have are often led by that part of us to feel safe. So I realized when I began parenting my first son, well, I realize now, I didn't realize it then,
right.
that so much of my parenting was to please my parents. And they weren't even there.
Right.
They weren't even present. And the expectations I had and how I navigated situations really had nothing to do with my physical child that I was parenting, but my inner child who was like, we're gonna get in trouble. Ooh, don't say that. You can't do that. Oh my God, my child just said what to me? I didn't get to say what to me. Man, that was a no-no. Right. But I had to realize that those individual responses were perpetuating trauma cycles. And so I made a determination. Generational trauma stops here. It stops with me. And sometimes that feels like this big old thing. And sometimes it's just in our decisions. When my son asks why, or my daughters ask why, give them an answer.
Yeah.
And if the answer I have is because I said so, pause and realize that it has more to do with me than it does with them. And I probably need to have a different response because it was never about them in the first place. That's how you stop generational cycles. And that's how we can start to pick up on how have these developmental wounds and these relational wounds throughout my life, how are they showing up in my parenting? The best way I can describe it is we have to slow down and pause. Like, our autonomic nervous system, we jump into response immediately. That's survival of the species, right? So not good, not bad. But when we can learn to slow it down and look at it from a perspective of how is this either helping someone feel safe, or what are they doing to drive them towards safety? What do I need? What do they need? When we start getting down to those levels, we can engage differently with ourselves and with our children.
I think that's so powerful. A lot of times when I'm working with families, I have families that are like, I've already tried that, I've already tried that, I've already tried that. And I know realistically it's a them piece, and that's so hard to talk about. The good news with that though is we can change ourselves, right? If we're relying on somebody, like if only my child would do X, you can't do anything about that. So that's not gonna help you. Another thing I wanted to talk about was when we're parenting our kids, and maybe we have kids who have experienced trauma through like more obvious means via foster care, or other means. Like my argument this week is that having a developmental disability, being neurodiverse in a neurotypical world, is going to cause trauma in and of itself. Also having this brain-based disability, and I have parents all the time ask me, how do I know if it's a bad brain day, like we're not firing all cylinders, or they don't want to do something, or how do I know that whether this is behavior, this behavior is trauma, or if it's FASD? And we sit in that space a lot. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've heard that same thing, as well as, just, well, how do I know if it's trauma, or how do I know if it's right? And the reason why people ask that is because they're going to respond differently based on what it is. And so my default is go with the response that's compassionate and curious. It doesn't matter. I don't want to minimize that. Let me be clear. The reason I say it doesn't matter is because they need something. And whether that need is on their central nervous system because of trauma they've experienced, or because they are heightened in their sympathetic nervous system because an expectation is unachievable in this moment, they still need something. So if we focus more on what do they need right now to feel regulated, to feel seen, heard, and understood, then we realize we're just asking the wrong questions. Right? And so we can finally come up with the answer, or this is a bad brain day, or this is this. But then it all comes down to they still need to be regulated, because inside of their body, they don't feel safe, or they don't feel heard, understood, which when I'm not heard and I'm not understood and I'm trying to communicate, does not feel safe.
Right.
So again, if we come back to we're either safe or in pursuit of safety, we just start asking different questions. Like, what do they need in this moment to help them feel safe? And then that saves us a lot of time, angst, and energy in trying to figure out, the direct source, which is sometimes so overlapping and so intermingled that it's hard to separate those things out. And so, let's just meet the need, which at the foundation is safety. And then, I think we just engage differently. And that goes for ourselves too, because as we're engaging with that child, whatever the reason, they're responding that, and we start to feel unsafe. We have to start asking ourselves, what do I need to feel safe? And what I've been driving people in the direction of is use your 5 senses. Build a toolkit. What do I need to look at that helps me feel more regulated? What do I need to smell that helps me feel more regulated? What do I need to hear? What do I need to feel on my skin? What do I need to taste? And if we can just have at our disposal those things, then we can just kind of give ourselves that shot. Okay, there was that sniff of lavender. Okay, I'm okay. Take that deep breath. Now I'm going to move forward and engage to meet that person's need. But oftentimes we're in our sympathetic nervous system. We're feeling unsafe. We're hyper aroused. We're experiencing shame. Our littles are going crazy. And we're like, let me help this kid. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
First we gotta help us. Because then we end up doing more damage. We end up, escalating higher, perpetuating cycles. So that's my perspective on that.
Well, what I think was interesting from what you said is you were describing the senses, and I've been thinking about this a lot as just everything's been continuing. We talk about sensory processing disorder in the context of our kids, and we talk about how do we help them regulate in the context of senses. And I have noticed for myself that hammocks are very relaxing, and like I like the swinging and the pressure, and I'm like, but you picture this as being like for little kids who like are having temper tantrums. I mean, TBH, I have temper tantrums sometimes too, but like, yes, hammock is good for me. So like I should have more of that, and that I should create my own sensory diet because I realize that that works well for me, right? And we kind of push that off for something that we're only looking for our kids. But for me, that's a self-care tactic. And very often we say self-care is like, very like getting your nails done or something, when that's not the only piece and really not the most effective piece in the big scheme of things.
Amen. Got a whole training about it, but yeah, go ahead.
So I thought that was interesting. But also when we're talking about looking at our kids, and you said you were talking about us being dysregulated. So what happened, this is usually I'm going to give you the face that my kids get. I'm going to go, Mommy needs to reset. That's the face that happens. And then I go and I have to go reset. But like, if I can feel myself spiraling, very familiar with that feeling, like super familiar. So I can feel it coming, and I'm like, I gotta go somewhere else, because I know that I'm not gonna parent this. I'm gonna yell at this or whatever. We're not gonna fix the problem here. That is I mean, I've been parenting for 4 years now, and that's something that has come about very recently. And it's still hard in the moment. That's a hard thing to execute. It's a good thing to know to do, but it's a hard thing to execute. And we talk so much about teaching our kids how to well, a lot of times with traditional parenting, we're talking about timeouts. I teach resets so we can teach a skill that we're like using in the long run, by modeling also us. Like, we need to do that for ourselves. And we can't just say, our kids got so upset, I can't believe them, but you're getting upset also. So how do we show them that there are healthy ways to cope with our big feelings, or our internal 3-year-old that's having a fit right now? Yes, it's good information. That's what they say. They call you the trauma ninja.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's a therapy ninja. So,
Okay.
in the trainings, it's like, hey, I'm here to learn about how to help other people. And then It's like, it's all going to be coming back. It's
yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Here. It's here.
And that's so much of parenting. And I mean, in the context of us getting trauma informed, like as foster parents, we learn a lot about how to help our kids. But it's this thing with so many foster parents have experienced childhood trauma, myself included. And it's like, we're drawn to this craziness, and we haven't dealt with our own stuff. So I think this is a really good conversation, one that I hope to continue. I want to spend a moment highlighting your awesomeness that you have going on. So you have a podcast, so the first time I met you, it was that you were at a speaking engagement in a county nearby, and there was like, your biggest fan was sitting up front, and he was like taking pictures, and he was like nodding and everything you were saying. And I was like, I don't know who this guy is, but they matching shirts on. It's your husband, which is so cute.
Yes, which I'm sure he's on the live right now, because he's uber supportive. And yes.
So I was going to mention your podcast, but I can't mention your podcast without mentioning him, because he's your producer. And so we have a time booked before the end of the month. I don't know when it's going to come out, to talk for a podcast time also. So hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit more in depth about this very interesting topic in general, but also FASD. And then, so you have your podcast. You put a lot of good information out on your Therapy Thursdays, which is on YouTube and Instagram.
So I promote the Therapy Thursdays on Instagram, Facebook, all the social media.
Okay.
And in my YouTube channel. The podcast is the Labors of Love podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere you get your podcast. We are in discussions about starting a live and streaming television show. Oh, and what a beautiful shirt you're wearing.
Oh my gosh, if only you too could own this shirt.
Only you could. So yes, I have a t-shirt line. So the Hope Dealer that Aubrey is wearing, I have a shirt that says cope with a strike through it, and then healing. Like, we've coped long enough, let's move to healing.
Yep.
And then I have one that says generation trauma stops here.
I love that one.
So you can access all of that, access to my podcast, access to the Therapy Thursday videos, and my shirts. Oh, and also, so a book that has just come out. I have a chapter in an anthology called The Heart of a Therapist. That can also be purchased on my website, and the website is www.thelaborsoflove.com.
I love it. You've got so much good stuff going on. And every time I'm in a meeting with anything in this area, they're like, and we have LaShonda speaking on this today, and we have LaShonda speaking on this thing. So everybody's hearing your awesomeness, which is great. But if you start with the podcast, I recommend starting with her intro podcast, because it explains who she is and kind of gives you context to the rest of it, which I think is really good. So Thank you so much for joining us and educating us on this blurry line as far as parenting, because it's a tough place to be. I got this shirt specifically because so often as parents of an invisible disability that manifests itself in so many different ways, we lose our hope very often.
Yeah.
And so when I'm talking to parents, it's often like this exasperated, I don't know what to do. And so I like to incite that there is hope. I have a great home life and I love all my kids and we've got hope. We have hope, but a lot of it begins with healing. So
Yes.
do that.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I will post this on my feed and I'll work on getting you the video so you can do the same.
Perfect. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to continuing our relationship to talk about this very important topic.
Very important. Very important. Bye.
Bye-bye.